Hey everybody, welcome back to Backlot Banter. I'm your boy Abram, joined as usual by the notorious Zack Snyder's Justice League is one of my least favorite movies of all time, co-host
Me.
himself,
How's it
Tucker
going?
Hazel. And we are here today to
The
do
impossible.
the impossible. Yeah, and that is talk about the, and I'm going to use heavy air quotes here, theatrical
Sure.
cut of Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon Part 1, Child of
Yeah.
Fire, I believe is the
What
subtitle
does
for
that
this
mean?
movie.
I was thinking about that as the movie was wrapping up.
we'll
What
get-
does that have a reference to? I assume it's the main character, but why? Unclear.
I think it's the kid that Sophia Boutella was protecting, but we'll get it. But I also,
Oh, that's right. Okay,
We'll get into it.
Let's talk about the movie at some point.
if you want to berate us for not liking Rebel Moon, spoiler alert, leave a comment in the description. You can also join our Discord link as usual, top of the description. I said leave a comment in the
can't do
description. You
that.
can't leave it there.
There's no text
But
box
frankly, if you're gonna berate us, I would prefer you were looking for a comment section
Sure.
that doesn't exist
Yeah.
than actually finding it. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell. That's everything. Let's just set the scene for a second, Tucker. Right?
Well, frankly, actually, I want to
I
quickly
am
say, I wish less people
Sure.
knew where
Intercede.
the comment section was, because we got a comment today on my migration review that says, "Let's go
Sure.
brown the
Go
Princess
ahead.
Ryber." What the fuck does that mean? I wish less
that have any
people.
significance
No,
to-
I have obviously has nothing to do with migration. I wish less people knew where the comment section were, so this kind of shit wouldn't show up
Fair
in my
enough.
inbox.
That's fair enough. Tucker, I am a pretty big Zack Snyder fan.
Many are
I
saying this.
notoriously love Batman versus Superman. I've seen it like literally 8 times. I frankly have not seen that much of Snyder's work outside of the DCEU. May that rest
Yep.
in peace, by the way. Go watch Tucker's Aquaman review. I didn't even fucking bother to see
You can go watch
Aquaman.
my review though. I think you should. I think it'd be very
yeah,
fun for you to
you-
watch that review.
Okay, I'll watch your review.
Also, because it's the first solo review I've recorded in about 5 years, so I'm a little out of shape there. But it's fun.
Fair enough. It's a throwback though, and I was watching you back in your Ready
Sure,
Player One
yeah.
days, so I'm happy to see this. But Tucker, I have to say, I was not happy to see Rebel
Ah.
Moon, because even though I am a big fan of Zack Snyder, I think that Rebel Moon is just completely incoherent. I mean, I was reflecting on this morning, right? I stayed up. I did the Psychic Damage double feature of Saltburn on Amazon Prime and then Rebel Moon on
Yeah.
Netflix. So I was there literally frame one for
You did
for
a Rebel Moon speedrun. Yeah,
I did.
You would have got on the leaderboards.
And that means we're recording this. What is today?
Yeah.
Saturday. So
2
we're
days
recording
after release.
two days after I've seen the film. I was reflecting on it this morning because I knew we were gonna do the review tonight. Rebel Moon to me, and this is my opening thesis of the film. It feels like a hallucination.
Sure.
Because Rebel Moon is not a movie. The cut of Rebel Moon that we have right now is the outline of a film. It is a bunch of vignettes. It's the sort of in-progress version of a movie that when I was still in school, we would show to the class when in the middle of making our proper projects
Yeah.
for my various filmmaking classes. This is the unfinished, show me what you got so far cut of a film. And I reflect back on it, Tucker, and I swear to God, and I'm not good at this usually, so this doesn't mean a ton, but I don't remember any character names. I don't really remember the plot, even though it's very simple. This movie just kind of washes off of you because there are no character relationships, there's no stakes, there's no very clearly defined world building. I do think that when Zack Snyder releases the movie, not the 2 hours 15 minutes long
studio
trailer,
cut.
we could have a more substantive conversation about the film. But after watching this, I'm frankly perplexed. I think that it's just a complete failure on all fronts.
Yeah, it is bizarre, and it is disappointing to me because I was actually rewatching our last Zack Snyder review, which was for Army of the Dead, his previously released film,
Sure.
which
Good
is a film
movie.
that I like. I think it's probably my second favorite of Zack Snyder's movies, and I think he's hit or miss, but I do think that out of the films I've seen from him, he's more on the good side than the bad side. And this one I thought was exciting because one thing that I mentioned in that Army of the Dead review is finally he's getting into writing his own scripts and coming up with his own worlds and not adapting things from what other people know. You're not basing your preconceived notions on this isn't what Superman should be. This isn't what the Watchmen should be. This is
what the Guardians of Ga'Hoole should be.
That actually is. I believe that is a book adaptation.
Yes.
Or 300, which is a graphic novel. Like he was so known for adapting things that it was very cool, especially with Army of the Dead, which I would say was a success, to see him stepping into totally original worlds. And this was meant to be the original Zack Snyder world. That was / is going to, hard to tell at the moment, going to spawn sequels and games and spin-offs and be the next big thing, the modern science fiction IP for the modern audience. And that the reason that disappoints me is because I think I want that. I want the next IP. I want the next creator's world, even if it is derivative of other things, to exist and add to the canon and expand what we are talking about, so we're not just repeating the same talking points about the same fucking characters and worlds that have existed for decades and decades. And I wanted this to be the next thing. And I think it could be if more things coming down the pipeline work. But this is maybe the worst first impression for a what is establishing itself from the ground floor as an IP, where there is a game being made and the sequel is releasing in 5 months. This is one of the worst first impressions I've ever seen. I mean, this movie does not give you any reason to care about these characters. It does not give you any real connection to the lore of this world because it's sprinkled so incoherently throughout the film. There are so many characters introduced and plot lines picked up and dropped off at random places, and it ends in a spot that I thought we still had another act left. It's a very bad movie, and I think that also extends to most of the craft areas as well. I think that the shot composition and the depth of field and the bloom lighting and the acting and the CGI is okay. Like it does not hit anything on a great measure. The best you can say is that some elements are solid but not remarkable. But most of the areas, it is bad in. It is just worse Star Wars. That's just the categorical truth of Rebel Moon.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't inherently have a problem with the obvious homage and derivation at the core of the film. I mean, we go to the Mos Eisley Cantina for one of the action sequences in this movie.
Hey, by the way, they do that in Aquaman too.
Hey, my friend doesn't like you. I don't like you. Phenomenal. That's phenomenal. But let's just get the whole director's theatrical cut out of the way, thing out of the way. I just want to read a quick quote that our friend John dropped in the Discord server and just said, this comes from a comic book movie interview with Comic Movies The Site interview with Zack Snyder, where he says, I'm a good partner in that sense, Snyder added. It was Netflix's idea. They're like, what if we do whatever you want over here, do the PG-13 cut, and then go nuts on the other cut? We don't care. That's the thing I've never experienced before. It's when the dimensional rift happened between the two versions, when that was said out loud. He also says, quote, it's almost like a different movie, referring to his cut. It's almost a different universe that R-rated cut lives in. And I don't even really want to belabor the point because it gets beyond sort of reviewing what's actually here with Rebel Moon. But I think it is embarrassing that Netflix has completely misread what made the Snyder Cut a desirable product to completely botch this cut of the film. Because it's just important to remember, it's just a quick sidebar, the reason people were so upset with the Justice League is not just that the film is not good, but because Zack Snyder was removed from it. He basically lost an authorial intent on that project because of WB. So the interest on fans' behalf was not only to see a better version of Justice League, but to see the creator that they love, whose voice was basically cast aside by management, get the chance to tell their story. This is Netflix just, frankly, for a completely arbitrary reason, spooling up two versions of the movie, I think without really realizing the knock-on effect of that. The Snyder Cut was very big in particular circles, but we know from the numbers on HBO Max and everything that it was not a massive success. So what they're essentially doing here is taking a fan movement with very particular contexts and trying to artificially recreate it. But what they're really doing is just alienating the vast majority of mainstream viewers of Netflix from the Rebel Moon IP. Because I promise you, most people who put on Rebel Moon either are not going to get through it, or B, certainly not fucking coming back for the director's cut. So I think that
Well,
and
especially
that's all I'll
because
say on
this
that,
first
but I
one
think it's a complete
leaves
misfire.
a bad first impression, and that is
Yeah.
what sours me
Yeah.
on the idea of this becoming something bigger. Where again, it could turn around. Part two could be better. The director's cut could be
Yeah.
better. The game could be a great game that Zack Snyder announced at Summer Game Fest last year. It could be.
Yeah, we'll see.
But I only want to find out because I'm still searching for that next IP for Zack
Right.
Snyder to have his own universe that he can continue to tell stories in that's not adapting from other people. But but most people aren't going to want to do those. I assume we will see a massive drop off in whatever the numbers are for Rebel Moon Part 1 to Part 2, which I believe releases before either of the director's cuts comes out. And then those are going to create a weird divide between the I'm going to use this in the largest air quotes possible. I'm going to actually use both my hands. That's how big these air quotes are.
Go
the
for it.
Cultural understanding of Rebel Moon versus the people that are
Sure.
actually interested in it who have watched the director's cuts that will presumably have a totally different understanding of what the universe is and who these characters are and what their backstories are because there's going to be such a difference. And but again, all this stems from background stuff, production things, Netflix misunderstanding what the point of director's cuts is, even in the first place. Zack Snyder not being ballsy enough, I guess, to go against that because he could have pushed back against that and said, no, I'm making the 3-hour version of this movie that is going to be the better version that clearly communicates my vision, but he didn't. And so what we are left with is the film that Netflix released, Zack Snyder and Netflix agreed to release as our introduction to this universe. And Abram, I have to say, the introduction to this universe, by which I mean the first 35 minutes of this movie, not bad. Solid introduction to a film. People struggling on this farming planet. They've got a culture going on there. The ostensibly the Empire stand-in coming down and arguing with them, and their leader getting killed, and Korra wanting to rise up and rebel against this. Like, sure, this is a decent little community. I like that she has this backstory, and she's hidden away on this planet as a farmer. The background shots of these fields and mountains are looking pretty solid. We get Anthony Hopkins as a robot. Great. Not phenomenal, but like an okay way to start this universe. But then there's the rest of the film, which quickly devolves from a reasonably paced opening section to just absolute choppy slop for another 90 plus minutes of this film.
Yeah, it's interesting because I agree with you in part, but I also disagree in terms of the sort of effect of that first half an hour. I just don't think it's compelling. You're definitely right that it's the most coherent portion of the film.
There's one storyline. There's like two characters.
Yeah,
it's a by the numbers plot of farming community is getting their stuff taken by the fascist overlords. I've seen that story before, but it is on screen. And it doesn't surprise you, but that's just how it is in the beginning.
Yeah, it's I think about Avatar in this situation, right? I mean, when people talk about Avatar, it's commonly derided as, oh, it's just Dances with Wolves, but with aliens, or Pocahontas, but with aliens.
No one under the age of 45 has seen Dances with Wolves or cares.
The larger point though is that it's actually somewhat smart that Cameron did that because it gives people a touchstone to get into a completely foreign world with.
Lots of ideas.
Way of Water is a much
in Avatar.
Yeah, and then Way of Water is a much different film narratively, and it has a lot more stands on its own 2 feet a lot better, I think. But by that token, then I don't really care if we're doing like the Akira Kurosawa village under siege thing at the beginning of
Have you seen Seven Samurai?
Again, I have not seen Seven Samurai.
Go watch the better version of this movie.
Yeah, I would like to see
Phenomenal.
That's on the queue. Part of the problem is that, okay, fine, we're using a familiar framework, it's whatever. But we're using that framework to give people a touchstone into this world, but it's not very imaginative where we begin, I don't think. The very obvious Tatooine, low sci-fi, largely fantasy analog at the beginning is kind of cool. I don't hate the whole farming thing, but when it is both familiar plot and been there, done that art direction and ideas, it just doesn't really grab me. And then we have what I think is just sort of a lowbrow sexual assault incident to inciting incident for Cora to spring into action, it just feels kind of cheap to me. I think that it's just not especially effective. I'm not
a little bit worried to
interested in
see
the
what
plot,
that
really.
scene becomes in the R-rated extended cut of this film.
I think that it could get distasteful. I mean, I think that Zack Snyder is cognizant enough to be careful, but that scene is also a good first indication of the fact that the movie we have is not the movie he wanted to make, or the movie we really should even be watching, because the amount of weird cutaways are clearly like CGI'd. Stab wounds or gunshots or things when Cora is frankly going sicko mode is it's pretty like it just really takes me to the experience. And I think that's one of the major issues I have with this cut of the film. Not only is it incoherent for the sake of an arbitrary runtime, but it also clearly is neutering action sequences and other sequences of the film for no reason other than to achieve a PG-13 rating, which has no bearing on the platform of Netflix. And it's my fucking my PS5 neither my PlayStation camera or my fucking Wii sensor bar can tell how old I am, right? There's no check if I'm old enough to watch Rebel Moon. So the result is a film where you're watching a scene and you're seeing, okay, this has obviously been like edited for TV basically. And that makes it feel very very weightless.
Sure.
And I think that the weightless quality of Rebel Moon is one of its massive problems.
Yeah. The action is, I think, one of the things I'm the most hit or miss on. I think it's probably where the direction shines the best in terms of the guns firing and people hiding behind pillars and canisters and boxes and doing dodge rolls and throwing knives. And one of our characters, Nemesis, has glowing red swords that like leave this trail behind them. There is a sense of kineticism to some of these action sequences that lead these characters to be like, okay, I see them doing cool stuff, and therefore they are like by visual default a cool character. And so I will partially praise this film for its action choreography. Sure. I think that, again, I agree with you. I think the reason it doesn't hit that full mark is because it's obvious with some of these the looks on people's faces and the actions they are performing with swords and guns and miscellaneous weapons, that these are meant to be rated R, blood going everywhere, Zack Snyder action sequences like we see in 300 and Watchmen and BVS and these movies where violence takes center stage to increase the spectacle imagery that Zack Snyder is good at. But unfortunately, this film, as you said, is studio cut back to appeal to a wider audience. But again, would that really have changed much? I think it would have just succeeded in catalyzing a stronger fan base if the first version of this had released that was a rated R. And this could have been from the start the rated R Star Wars version universe, right? That is not afraid to be a little more gritty, afraid to have a little more blood. Where Star Wars, because it's Disney and because it's theatrical release and supposed to be appealing to children, are supposed to have this family-friendly thing to it. And that's part of why Star Wars is as culturally appreciated as it is, even to this day. But this could have had its own appeal. But because it was cut back to PG-13, it even robs that identity of itself. That identity that it could regain. It could regain. But I don't know if it can. I don't know if it actually can, because this first impression is really sour, even in those action sequences that are good. They're not great. They're not fantastic. They are solidly choreographed and CGI'd action sequences. I think that's probably where Sofia Boutella shines the most. Her choreography as Cora is quite fantastic, actually. And seeing her dodge and take out a pistol off a guy's corpse and shoot 3 guys with this, like, Jesus Christ, this is pretty sick. But it doesn't land for multiple reasons.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I'm not necessarily like a, ooh, show me blood and gore and I'll care type of viewer. But I think it's just the principle of knowing. Sure. It's the principle of watching a scene and knowing that it's not the way it's supposed to be that makes it feel cheapened. But I think you're right nonetheless that these sort of Snyder-isms that this film does have, I think are pound for pound lesser than his other recent work, like Army of the Dead.
Oh, absolutely.
Feels a lot more distinct than this does. But you do get that sometimes. You're right. The action, I think, is probably when the film is at its most compelling. I think about the flashback when Korra is sort of recounting her military service, and we're seeing her on like the snow planet, and she's over her husband's corpse, and then she's running into battle. I mean, that has the Snyder huge operatic comic book panel composition and slow mo and chaos and everything you expect out of him. I think it has, and it works. And I think Sofia Boutella, to your point, is probably my favorite part of the movie. I mean, she again has, by merit of how this film was edited, not much to work with, but it's clear that, again, from this almost demo reel of what Rebel Moon is, she is doing a great job with the material. But I think you raised a larger point about what can even be fixed, really, by a different cut of the movie.
Yeah.
I think what can be fixed is a lot of the complete lack of character interaction. But what can't be fixed, just as we're thinking about this opening sequence just a little bit more, what can't be fixed is the way the film just is shot. I think that this movie looks awful. I mean, the shallow focus cinematography in this movie, to me, just absolutely doesn't work. And there's something very uncanny about a lot of it where, and I don't know if this is partially because there's like no real sets in this movie, so, that might not be true, but a lot of it's obviously CGI. You end up with these like shallow focus shots where the stuff out of focus almost feels like you're looking at a 3D image from the wrong angle. Like it's ghosting or it looks weird. There's no precision to the compositions at all. And I found it extremely distracting, actually, to just look at big portions of this movie or these huge wide shots that are just soft focus to shit, because clearly it's all CGI. So you got to kind of mask it, especially in that first town. There's a couple wide shots of people like walking across a bridge, and I'm like, nobody's actually in this place, and you've soft focused the camera so we can't tell. I just think that it's not executed with the technical clarity that Snyder's films are. One thing I don't think you can deny about a lot of his work is that you look at BVS and there's a very clear understanding of that deep focus frame and what's going on and how it's composed. But Rebel Moon feels very haphazard. It feels very technically incompetent. I just don't think that there's a lot of impressive shots or technical fidelity behind this movie at all.
I think it is the composition, the fidelity, and the lighting, and the set design, and the color grading, and the art direction that work together to create something that I think conceptually could have been cool, but with the actual execution they were able to see, leaves so much to be desired. I mean, this is one of the gray, brown, tannest movies you've ever seen in your life. I mean, it takes all the pomp and pulp value out of watching a sci-fi adventure movie. We're seeing people walk through these gray sets in brown outfits, and it's in super shallow focus, and the only thing you can tell is like some lights in the background that are usually bloomed to shit, so they're like bleeding into the rest of the frame. It really is distracting, because even though these worlds that we're going to talk about that they're visiting are things that we've seen before, we've seen them done well. So even if they're not like the most conceptually exciting, they could be delivered in a visual way that engages us to these worlds and makes them at least somewhat memorable. But none of these worlds are memorable, and it's sometimes even hard to tell what type of planet they're on or what kind of people are in the background, because it is such constantly shallow focused, over bloom lighting, color graded to like a kind of a brown paste smeared across the screen. And so I'm just looking at these sequences, I'm like, I can tell the people that are in front of these, but because we're doing, just like a medium shot with a blurred out background, I don't care. These people are not in a place. They're not interacting with the environment. There's no sense of the scale of what buildings are around them or the people that are milling around. There's no context for these things. And it ends up having these characters and the pacing of the film feel very samey and repetitive and without grounding, which is a huge problem for a world that's supposed to introduce you to a universe. We do these sort of like title card, like this is blank world, name of world, and I'm maybe after a game in another version of this movie and then a second movie and another version of that movie, maybe I'll remember some of these names of these worlds, these locations, but there's no instant iconography for this movie because of the budget or because of the way that it was produced or Zack Snyder's style mixing with Netflix's house style somehow, some way, they managed to smudge the entire visual identity of this film.
Just one other technical point. I mean, this movie racks focus really badly and obviously. Just another thing. I just feel like I had to get it out there. There's some shots I'm like, what the fuck? Who the fuck is pulling focus right now, and why are they doing it so poorly?
I'm actually curious. I'm curious to look at the
better.
cinematography for this movie. Keep talking.
Yeah, not that I could do it better. I've had to pull focus on student films and done it badly.
Zachary Snyder is his own cinematographer. This is the second movie he's done cinematography for. Yeah. The first one being Army of the Dead, which also, if I just rewatched my review yesterday morning, also has a really bad shallow focus, weird racking focus. That's my biggest issue with that film, and it's another giant issue with this one. Zack Snyder is not a good cinematographer. He should not be doing his own cinematography.
No, he shouldn't, and it's a bummer because again,
he's doing it for part 2. So,
I mean, part 2 is done already. You'd assume because it's coming out in 3. It's coming out in 4 months? It's in April, I think. I mean, we can agree or disagree with the quality of them, but you look at BVS and you look at the Justice League, his cut of it. In Man of Steel, these are films that have a vision to what's being put in the frame, and I just don't think that's the case here. I think Zack is really good at having that vision and showing the camera what should be in shot, but I just don't think that technical skill is there the way I think he's got the technical skill to be a director and a visionary in these other dimensions of filmmaking. But I think you're right about the planetary point, right? I mean, this is one of the places that I think that the cut of the film lets us down because, again, I don't remember any of the planets' names.
God. Wait, hold on. The name of the first planet, Velt. Or is it their city? I can't tell. But that is a term uttered in this film.
Could be the name of the crop.
Could be.
For all we know. Could be the name of the bird.
Speaking of the crop, you remember when there was just a single slow-mo shot of someone scattering seed? It's like, why was that in slow-mo? What are we doing?
That was funny because that was maybe one of the few glimmers of hope that I had. I'm like, we're just gonna go fucking.
This slow-mo's not. It's very present, but it's not like that's one of the only like egregiously why is this slow-mo shots.
I almost wanted more slow-mo.
Sure, yeah, just for a visual identity.
I mean the seeds. It is gratuitous to have somebody just dropping seeds and you put that in slow motion.
It's not even a great. It's not even a good shot.
No, it's almost like he was just fucking around in the editing bay and forgot.
I assume that he records everything in like ultra high frame rate, so just in case he can extend it.
I'm sure he probably does. This is the guy that did an interview with Grace Randolph on like a red fucking rebel high end like film camera.
I don't know. I'm not familiar with this. This is news to me.
It's just neither here nor there, but. We go to one planet that I think has a little bit of time to like have establishing shots and give you a feel for it, and that's when we go to meet Asajj Ventress,
Nemesis,
for lack of Nemesis. We meet Nemesis, and we actually like spend the time to have a shot of our characters going down an elevator, and we're in this cyberpunk cityscape. And again, cyberpunk cityscape, very familiar. Whether you're playing Starfield or you're watching Blade Runner or anything, you've seen this before. But, of course, only the two things you should be doing with your day. But you get a little bit of a feel for context because we're there and there's this sort of implication that this big spider woman is stealing children, and there's something interesting about that. I think that's a sequence that has a lot of inherent intrigue. And when I was rewatching A New Hope recently for my Star Wars show, one of my massive takeaways in that film is that there's a lot of inherent intrigue to the movie. It invites a lot of questions, and I think that sequence does do a good job of doing the same thing. What's going around the corner of this cyberpunk planet? This big spider lady, where does she live? Is she like up above the buildings? How many kids has she stolen? It sounds kind of humorous when I say it, but there's something I think to that. To me, there's that quality of like. Of curiosity is not present for any of the other locations we go to. They just exist for the sake of exposition, for the sake of finding the next character. And I think that's a bummer. Even the Colosseum location where we meet Jaimin Hansu's character.
We see that for like 3 shots, maybe.
It's so fast that part of me is like, oh, I wonder why dead bodies being dragged around. And I'm like, oh, it's a
Okay.
Coliseum. So he lost a fight. Okay, good enough. It doesn't inspire that same level of awe, except for the cyberpunk sequence.
Yeah.
The only one that I really felt compelled by, I
Yeah,
think.
here I think is where we're really going to get into the meat of why this film fails. We've talked about it visually and technically,
Yeah.
and the way that it was cut to remove identity. But I think my biggest problem with the film is not those areas, because there are films that have been cut and have had bad visuals that I still find interesting. But I think the real issue with this film is its structure, which ties into its characters, which ties into its pacing, which ties into its world building. All of these things are completely in sync, and it's a very bad sink to be in. This is a gross sink. This is someone hasn't been washing their dirty dishes in this sink, because the pacing of this movie is chopped to shit. It is, as soon as Cora leaves her hometown of Velt, let's call it that, her current hometown, because she has the whole past and all that, she starts to jump to other planets where people that she's heard of could possibly join her team to protect her town. Now, this is the exact plot of Seven Samurai, which, again, Zack Snyder's not hiding, but I just thought it was funny. Except in Seven Samurai, everyone is aware of these locations. They share a culture. It's Japan. It's fucking feudal Japan. This is a place with a coherent history and identity. The problem with Rebel Moon is that each of these planets are their own thing. These characters are their own thing. We've never heard of them. Well, we've lightly maybe heard of them occasionally before, but we have no idea who they are. We don't know how they're going to feel about her showing up. The context for these is completely nonsense, because there's no reason other than she needs to go find the next person. And so every member of the team, of which there are like 8 by the end of the film, and some of them die and some of them are backstabbers and there's all this stuff, but the total cast that are joining her team over the course of this film is like fucking 8 people, which is already too much. I want to get into that. But all of them feel like goobers. They all feel like the next Deus Ex Machina plot point that she's going to go find, and they're going to do the one thing they were designed to do. We're going to introduce them. It's going to be a totally unrelated sequence that usually has nothing to do with her or her friend Gunnar, who came with her. Has nothing to do with them. They're going to go off, do their own thing. They're come back and be like, you know what? Sounds good. I'll join your team. They're going to get paid. Paid in what? Paid in corn? Paid in miscellaneous grain? Unclear what their motivations are. Their histories are explained haphazardly across the course of the film. But again, all of this ties back into we're just jumping from scene to scene. And the only way you can tell that this film is progressing is by how many characters are standing in the background when you introduce the next character. If Jaimin Hansu is in the background of the shot you're establishing a character, okay, you're probably about 4/5 of the way through the movie. If Nemesis is there, okay, you're probably about 2/3 of the way through the movie. That is the only thing, because those characters that you met a couple scenes ago, they have no reason to be here other than they are on the team. They are not interacting with these new characters. They're not reacting to this new planet because they have a history there. Or there's no reason for any of these scenes to be in this order necessarily. And it is incredibly frustrating and feels so fucking disjointed. It's so disjointed.
That's a good point. I mean, there is no... It almost feels like we're just watching somebody's like fucking Mass Effect playthrough where they go and meet the characters they want on their team or whatever. It's like,
the only thing that needs to happen is
like...
meeting Kai, because he backstabs them at the end of the film. He's the only character that needs to be introduced. Period.
Yeah. I actually wanted to give the example of the character of Kai, Charlie Hunnam's Kai,
who has the Scottishest accent that has ever existed.
Just funny. It's a good indication to me of the problem you're expressing, because I agree with you completely. The character of Kai, and this is, I guess, spoilers, but the movie's in one ear out the other.
We are 45 minutes into a Rebel Moon review. Anyone who's watching this far has seen Rebel Moon, Abram. This isn't I'm going to click on this review to find out if I should watch Rebel Moon or not. This is an hour-long review. You're a fucking idiot if you've done that.
The character of Kai we meet in the Mos Eisley Cantina with the same sort of debonair quality that we meet Han Solo. And again, I don't have an inherent issue with this. It's a touchstone to get us into the scene, and I think that's actually a good action scene, and the expected but cool, beat of him shooting the guy when Korra thinks she's going to be shot. So you get a certain, because you have this Han Solo framework, you get a certain understanding of who this character of Kai is. And the film just sort of asks you to ride with that, because there is, I believe, only a single other scene that involves Kai and Korra. It's this odd scene of exposition very, very late into the film, after we've already
right before the final action sequence.
Ray Fisher's character of Captain Bloodaxe, who, by the way, the preview for Rebel Moon Part 2 that plays immediately after Part 1 shows him alive, which is kind of funny.
Okay, he was on that thing that blew the fuck up, like really blew up.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's a flashback, but it didn't seem like it. I mean, it does. He
also has a sister who I think might be the most useless character in the film.
Yeah. The point is, we wait a protracted amount of time before Kai and Korra, who are ostensibly, at least how I was understanding it before the film came out, like the main characters, actually have a scene together. And in it is this sort of, again, formulaic, oh, maybe I'll leave, maybe I'll stay. Yo, you need me because you like me.
Let's go drop off my shit on the planet because I want to go clean before things happen.
Yeah. That happens. It's a short scene, and it's jarring by merit of being one of the only sequences in the film that is more heavily about a character interaction than it is about exposition, even though that scene still serves the express function of getting us to the next plot point. It's at least something, right? But it's not nearly enough to have me give even an ounce of a fuck about Kai betraying our cast. Not 10 minutes later, because we've spent
it's
so
not
time
even 3 minutes later. I mean, these things are back to back, and that is really what.
That's fair.
Like that scene in particular, like really blew my mind, because not only had I kind of almost forgotten how he'd met Kai at that point. I'm like, oh, he's just another one of the people in the background. Like he could have been on any one of those planets at this point. By the way, this is more my fault than the film's, but I did watch this in like 3 chunks over the course of multiple days. So like that does not help my memory of in connection of these sequences. But
can I just say, by the way, quickly, I was afraid, because I knew when you started Rebel Moon, I was afraid that you hadn't logged it in a letterbox because you really liked it. There was a brief period of time when I was worried that you were hiding a reveal that you loved Rebel Moon.
I had family and friends and other things to do. But I did finish it today. And because I was like, I don't really remember who this fucking guy is. He has a Scottish accent, and he's kind of a Han Solo guy. Okay, we're going to drop off his cargo, okay. And then, again, you're right. This is one of the only sequences of, like, actual character interaction where their backstories play into the way that they're interacting with one another, and, like, they have this mild conflict of, is he going to leave? Is he trustworthy? And then it seems settled. It's like, okay, we're going to drop this stuff off. And then my mind goes to, okay, we're going to do this, and that's going to be the last thing, and then somewhere we're going to travel one final place and have the final action sequence. But instead, the film, like, hard cuts from, all right, we're going to drop the shit off, it's going to be awesome. And we're going to be on a team, it's going to be so cool. And then they step off the ship, and they're like, all right, load the boxes over there. Ha-ha, fucker! You idiot! You fell into my fucking trap. All these boxes were the exact things that will hold you in place. How did you not recognize these boxes? They were the things we saw earlier. Apparently, these fucking paralysis spider chairs are everywhere. Haha, fucker, you're now trapped. Like, all of you are trapped except for Gunner. Why didn't they bring a thing for him? It's just like, that scene happens so quickly. It happens so quickly. And it just hard cuts from that to that. And you're like, oh, guess we're in the last action sequence now.
Yeah, that also does remind me that there's a weird sort of, it's a weirdly low density of sci-fi and fantasy objects or items or ideas in the film.
There's Anthony Hopkins robots. There's those fucking horse things with the front, the head's kind of a little bit weird. They got pancaked a little bit. She's got a pistol that's kind of too tall.
There's a big bird.
There's a hippogriff in this movie.
Well, this is not an original thought of mine. Sorel on Twitter talked about this, but it's such a good point. It's a really good point because it also indicates the issue with this film. They were saying the sequence with the bird basically makes no coherent sense of why does Korra agree to this bet why are they negotiating with a slave trader? Why did they have any confidence in the guy taming the bird?
Why is he good at
Why
taming the bird?
is he good at taming the bird? Why?
Yeah, the whole thing.
And it also, I mean, it looks fucking awful when he's flying on the bird.
Yeah, yeah.
It's tough. I mean, that CGI is tough. This is a VFX award nominee shortlist.
Yeah,
Rebel Moon.
sure.
And I was watching that thinking to myself, man, this is tough. And it's a scene like that I think sort of encapsulates all the issues of Rebel Moon. The film is, to your point, on such a fucking breakneck sprint to the finish of having all the members on the team that we drop our characters into the scene at the last possible moment where there's no context to the larger world.
No, literally their ship lands and the level starts. The cutscene starts where the guy rides the bird, and you press the QuickTime events to make sure he doesn't fall off the bird. Like that I think you're right. That scene absolutely encapsulates all of this because it is, I think, maybe the quickest from walking off of the landing thing of the ship into like 5 feet away is this corral where that bird is. And what is this planet they're on? Why did they know to go here for this specific person? Why are they aware of this person? Why is this person in this context where he was a slave at that point? There's another guy, and are they raising these birds? But then why does no one know how to tame them? There are so many questions to that the answer is he's gonna go ride the bird and it's gonna be an action sequence. That's the answer. That's the answer to all of it. Why does it take not long to get from the ship to the thing? Why are these questions very perplexing? It's because it doesn't fucking matter. It doesn't matter at all. He's gonna ride the bird, and that's going to be a 4-minute chunk of the movie, and it's gonna feature a hippogriff, and he's gonna be a Hercules guy with long hair. It is the worst version of show don't tell. There's no tell at all. It's just I was shown something, and I'm like, you needed to tell me something about this before you showed it to me for me to give a single solitary shit.
It's interesting because show don't tell is usually stop telling and show, but I think you're making the interesting case that actually this film needed to do more telling. And it is another point about the original Star Wars trilogy I think must be brought into conversation. When you watch A New Hope, you're on the Rebel blockade runner for a little bit, and then you're on Tatooine for most of the film, then you're on the Death Star for most of the film, then you're in Yavin very briefly. That's the entire film, because the creative team recognized the fact that this is too much for your average viewer.
The average Star Wars film features 3 planets, maybe 4.
Yeah, they really take the time to make sure you understand the context of the location, because without it, it becomes a Rolodex.
This is Last Jedi, and there's that salt planet. I mean, that's a cool visual, but what the fuck is that planet? I don't know why I'm there.
Yeah, it's not structured in a way that lets your viewer connect, really. And I think that's the problem with Rebel Moon. There's really nothing to connect to.
I mean, frankly, actually, I just want to say, this is bringing up an interesting connection in my mind. These are the same complaints that people would have about something like Starfield or The Outer Worlds, where you just select the next planet on the map. Traveling there doesn't mean anything. It is you load in, you land, and you are immediately in to the next area. Of course, those are games. You have the chance to explore and take things at your own pace and learn about the world through conversations with NPCs. But the idea that the connective tissue between worlds is something that people grasp for in this kind of media, especially because Star Wars is so good at providing that downtime between sequences to return to the Millennium Falcon, return to the ship, have conversations, play some chess, do whatever, and then move on to the next thing. People complained very strongly about Starfield feeling like it was chopped up into different sequences because you didn't have that seamless transition, and there was just a loading screen in between. This is the filmic equivalent of that, where a hard cut cuts out any potential context or transition or just traveling distance between these locations. They feel like you just pressed load on the next area.
Yeah, you gotta. This film is operating. I'll continue your analogy. It's operating with an SSD mindset. It's we can get right to the next planet, so we will. But the ship
it needs some more 8th gen shimmying through the swimming through sequences
It
to
does.
load, so you get a little more context, a little more
does.
texture. I need the characters to crawl through. They
you
need
think
to press the crouch button to go through a waist-high tunnel.
They do. Or it needs Spider-Man riding on the
Yeah.
train in Spider-Man 2018, and I think it's an apt comparison because the ship, as a vessel of transportation in science fiction, is extremely important because it gives our characters an iconic location. Whether we're talking about the Millennium Falcon, the Milano, the Nebuchadnezzar, in Star Wars, Guardians, and Matrix, or whatever, it's this confined location that has an interesting art direction and gives you a look into the world, but it also keeps our characters contained in this one place along the journey with nothing to do but interact with each other. This film, by a merit of needing to be, for whatever reason, 2 hours, barely over 2 hours, it cuts all of that out. It's the Cliff's Notes version. It is its own video game tie-in. You see what I mean?
Sure, no, absolutely. Yeah, it's like the Lego Star Wars version of Star Wars.
Yeah, the assumption when you play the Lego Star Wars version of the Star Wars movie is you already know the plot of the movie, so you could cut.
You just want to get to the next
out,
cool sequence,
except for right, but that doesn't work when this is my first time in the world, and I'm gonna be honest, I don't really have a whole hell of a lot more to say other than that. That to me is what we know of Rebel Moon right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it doesn't inspire enough curiosity, I don't think, to be compelling to anybody outside of your fucking cinematic perverts like you and I, who are going to be here as soon as Rebel Moon Part 2 comes out to watch and the director's cut and everything. I think that it is a failure to attract a compelling audience, a mainstream audience. It doesn't compel them if it doesn't compel us. And I think it speaks to these fundamental issues, some of which can be fixed by a longer cut of the film, but some, particularly on a technical side, just can't.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see with more screen time, which again, it's probably done already, but how thin does the budget get stretched now that we're working with not only 2 movies, but 2 longer movies, because this is just the smaller movie of that longer movie. It's a bizarre thing that like kind of pulls into conversation all of these topics of budgeting and studio interference and directorial vision and how much studio meddling is maybe a good thing, to be like, actually you do need to have these elements to have the world feel a little more fleshed out, or let them free in certain areas. This film feels like the worst of all of that. They let Zack Snyder free, but they reined him in just the tiniest bit to where it hurts both of them, instead of the ideal, which is that some of that producers and writers and the team at the studio understand filmmaking and that sort of thing to like say, hey, your artistic vision is getting in the way of being appealing to a mainstream audience. Both of them failed on that part here, and I think that the final point I want to end on is this cast, because the way that they talk about these characters when they're setting them up, like sort of down the line, they talk about General Titus, they talk about Nemesis, and how badass these characters are and how cool their histories are. They talk about them with such reverence, and then these are, for the most part, reasonably big name actors that we've seen in good things joining this cast of this next sci-fi epic. The way they talk about them and present them makes you feel like we're gonna have like 3 Star Wars movies worth of awesome characters to buy action figures of and recreate the Lego sets of and like want to draw fan art of. But I think that this is where the movie fails from its potential to its execution the biggest, because Djimon Hounsou, fantastic actor. Just saw him in Gran Turismo based on true story. Awesome guy. With 2 of us go way back. But he's been around for decades, and he is always looking to be that next bit part character that you really resonate with, because he's such a compelling and like gravitating force of an actor. But he might be one of the least interesting characters in the entire film, because he shows up. I sent you a text with this. This is how funny this movie is. We show up on his Coliseum planet, like we press load and we're through the door of the Coliseum. He is like sleeping on the ground, like, oh, he's drunk or tired or fucking rat infested. It's hard to tell. And they're like, let's give him a bath. And then we give him a bath and we give him a haircut. And then he's like, thanks, I'll join your team. It's like, that is like the shitty side quest that you don't want to do in other video games. The fact that he's not introduced through a cool action sequence. We're told that he's cool. We never see him do anything cool. And and he looks reasonably cool. He's got this history. We know that he lost his entire army, but he's a really compelling general that, oh my god, now that he's teamed up with Korra, who has another sci-fi horseshit fucking name with an A, now that they're together, well, that's going to be crazy. We don't see any of that. Because this movie introduces our characters in such a fast clip, doesn't let them progress. The scenes that they show up in don't allow them to express their personalities or get to know the other members of the team. That happens with Titus. That happens with Nemesis. Let me get the other names of the characters. That happens with Tarek. That happens with the two Blood Axe people, which they're even worse because they only have one scene period to work with. And then we're in this last action sequence that, to me, again, did not feel like the last action sequence. I was ready for that to be a quick 3 to 5 minute skirmish, and then we're gonna actually go do the next thing. But it Dune Part 1 does, where it just ends, and you're like, oh, that's it? That's it? And then there's this whole, like, epilogue with the villain, who I think actually might be one of the better performances in the film. The villain who's actually apparently a robot, and he's got tentacles plugged into him, and then he visits. With Frothy from Hawkeye on a fucking ice pond, and then he stabs his staff. What the fuck is happening? Who's that guy? What's going on? Huh? And then the movie ends. Like, I don't know if I want to see part 2, because nothing you've established here makes me want to say, oh, what's going to happen next? Like, well, I wanted to care what happened in this film. This feels like a trailer for part 2. It feels like a trailer for that extended cut, which will presumably have more time between sequences to flesh out character interactions and give us better context of the personalities of our team members and the locations that they're visiting. But not in this film. What the fuck happened?
That's really the question, ultimately.
How did this happen? It's exceptionally
bad. Go buy
bad.
the G Fuel.
It was a G Fuel? It's a Rebel Moon G Fuel?
Yeah. Rebel Moon G Fuel.
What other Rebel Moon tie-in? What tie-in products would you want?
There's a picture on Twitter of the shelf of Rebel Moon merchandise, and it's just like fucking. It's just fucking nonsense. It's like G Fuel and.
I gotta look up Rebel Moon product tie-in. Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon is getting a ridiculous tie-in. Game. Oh, that's a game. Oh. Why is that ridiculous? I mean, it actually is kind of ridiculous. I was thinking about this when I was watching it. This movie being so bad, I think, probably means that game will be canceled. I was thinking that as I was watching Damien Bloodaxe like sacrifice himself, and I'm like, I'm just thinking to myself, is anyone gonna want an action figure of this guy? Is anyone gonna be interested to like play as him in a game? And I'm like, no, because I just watched the first introduction to this universe, and I don't give a shit, and I'm the target audience for this. And there's a big budget game in the works. I don't even know if that comes out.
It'll be interesting to see what the numbers are on Nielsen, on the top 10 on Netflix. So both their internal numbers and then the external, like,
apparently it's number 1
actual
right now,
numbers. Yeah. Okay.
On Netflix, but doesn't basically every new release hit that?
We'll see how fast it drops out of that spot.
I assume very quickly.
Tucker, I'm going to give Rebel Moon a 9.5 out of 100.
That's less than a 1.
I'll give Rebel Moon a 9.5 out of 50.
Okay, so it's a little under 2. No, a little over 2.
I'll give Rebel Moon a 9.5 out of 25.
Now we're getting. It's like
I want to give it about a 3 or a 4.
No, you don't. You did nothing but critique this movie.
No, I'll be serious, I give this movie about a 2.
Yeah, no, I'm the same place. Finishing this movie, I was conflicted because I did think that there were some reasonably good sequences at the beginning. I thought Sofia Boutella is flubbing some lines occasionally, but as an action presence and as the main character, I thought she was reasonably compelling. And I guess I wanted to give it the benefit of the doubt. I'm like, I want this to succeed. I want this to be cool. I want to care. But like quickly, half the shit had left my mind, and then I was texting you about how none of this makes any sense. And I'm like, no, this is a very, very poor film. I think it's one of the worst movies Zack Snyder's ever made, and it makes me worried for part 2 because what's that movie gonna be?
This puts me just in the unfortunate position of the fucking director's cut's gonna come out and it's gonna be
Better.
It's gonna be okay to good, and then I'm gonna love it, and then I'm gonna have to do this whole fucking song and dance as I have with his last 2 movies. So
yeah, I'm gonna give
Zach,
it I'm gonna give it a
for you.
1.9 out of 10. I think it's a bad movie. We're ready for you, Zach. We'll see you in 4 months.
You can't do that. You gave it 1.5 out of 5 stars in Letterboxd, so your score has to be higher than mine.
Oh. No, actually, I lowered it. I lowered it to 1 star.
That's what mine is.